Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Tales from the Road, Volume 13, Story Number 1. One late afternoon in August, I received a call on a domestic assault in progress. The assault occurred at a house just outside of town and involved a husband and wife. I was a brand new deputy and didn't have much experience under my belt. As I was driving down the dirt road, within a mile of the residence, I had the sudden urge to roll up my window. Keep in mind, this was a hot summer day, and I was only minutes from the house. Was it a sixth sense, divine guidance, or an angel telling me what to do? I don't know. I do know, however, I followed the urge and rolled up the window. When I rounded the bend and pulled into the driveway, a man suddenly darted out of the house and threw something at my patrol car. I had no idea what it was at the time, except it blew up like dynamite and started a fire in the driveway. I was so shocked. I wasn't even sure if he actually threw this thing at my car. I immediately radioed for dispatch and said, "There's a fire in the driveway at this house. Send some backup." I knew enough not to get out of the car. The man started yelling profanities at me, came to my driver's side window and pounded on it, and karate kicked the car and the window. He pounded on the windshield and shouted, "See? See, this is in my hand. It's a grenade. I'm going to pull the pin and blow you up." It was a significant threat. At first I was frozen. I couldn't see what was in his fist, but his nose was almost touching the windshield, and we had at least a 30-second stare down. Eventually, I put the car in reverse and put my foot hard on the accelerator. Time to blow this pop stand. Unfortunately, I got stuck in some sand on the side of the driveway. I thought, oh no, I'm toast now. Grenades? Does this guy really have a grenade? The left rear wheel of the car went off the edge of the concrete driveway and I spun the wheel, just hoping to escape. Fortunately, at this time, the deranged man ran off into the woods. As I continued trying to rock the car to free it from the sand trap, I could see him running back and forth, egging me on to get out of the car. I decided to wait for help to arrive. I informed Central Dispatch my patrol car was now stuck. The two backup patrol cars finally arrived, and one of the officers was able to subdue the man at gunpoint. Oddly enough, even though the man continued to threaten to blow us up with his grenade, none of us took a shot at him. As it turned out, he held a cigarette lighter in his hand. The simulator grenade that he threw at my patrol car could have instantly killed me had it entered the car through the window. I will forever be grateful for the urge to roll up my window on that hot August afternoon. I've listened to this voice many times over the years. Story number 2. One night while doing property inspections in back of an elementary school in Bronson, Michigan, I went back to the athletic building, which is approximately 100 yards from the school. I could not go around the building for there were red flags all around it. I parked my patrol car facing the building with headlights and the spotlight on. When I was checking the building, I was coming up to the southeast corner. In doing this, I observed lights going out. I figured this was the large light in front of the building. It was approximately 1 to 3 seconds after the lights went out. I stepped from the corner observing the patrol car lights had gone out. At this time, I drew my weapon and walked toward the patrol car. I knew whoever turned the lights off had to be in the patrol car. Walking up to the car, I cleared the front seat and back seat, and saw no one in the patrol car. At this time, I figured it had to be a short in the wiring. I then got into the patrol car and observed the headlight switch was turned off. It was humanly impossible for anybody to turn the lights off, for I did not hear a car door open or close, and I was approximately 20 yards from the patrol car. This scared me. I went back to the department and advised the chief of the incident and asked him if he could give me a logical explanation. The chief advised he could not. This incident I will never forget, for whatever turned the lights off was not human. Story number 3. In 1992, I was a California Highway Patrol officer. I was patrolling the back roads of Kern County, California, just outside of Bakersfield, California. It was 5 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, 106 degrees. I initiated an enforcement stop on a vehicle which was weaving side to side. As I made the stop, I noticed that there were two male passengers and the driver. I could see they were trying to hide something by leaning over the seats and hiding something. We were parked next to an open cotton field. As I got the driver out, I smelled alcohol. I gave him some field sobriety tests, which he passed, but I cited him for having an open container of alcohol. The right front passenger immediately got out without my request and confronted me. He became verbally abusive in Spanish. I'm bilingual, so I understood everything he said just fine. Next thing I know, he swung at me. I ducked, grabbed my radio to call for backup, and took hold of his shirt as well. He swung back and knocked the radio out of my hand. It hit the pavement and shattered. No backup was coming. I tackled him to the ground as his buddies now got out of the vehicle. The suspect immediately turned around, grabbed the back of my head, slammed his into mine. I was stunned, but hung on. I looked down at my shirt, saw that it was soaked in red. It was then that I realized my eyebrow was split in two, and I was bleeding profusely. He looked at my face and appeared stunned that I did not let go. He then grabbed a rock and began hitting my face. No more rules. The fight was on. It lasted approximately 11 minutes. 106 degrees, wearing a bulletproof vest and wool uniform. Finally, at one point, I got him on all fours, utilizing an old wrestling move. I held onto his legs and rear belt loop. He slowly turned around with the blackest of eyes. In a deep guttural voice in Spanish, he told me, "I'm going to kill you and leave you here." He had a smile on his face, saliva dripping, with a slow laugh. He grabbed me and threw me off him as if I were a feather. He then began kicking me with his boot toward my head. At one point, he grabbed my holstered weapon. I knew I was going to die. As I held onto him, I heard a low whisper in my ear, not female or male, just a whisper that said, "Ask God for help." Now, this is the part of the story that I never told anyone else because I would have been ridiculed and possibly removed as an officer. I know that I dealt with a demonic entity in one form or another within this individual. The voice itself was not human. I have never experienced human strength like this. Next story. I used to live in New Hampshire, and I would drive to Boston at night. I would always know when policemen had speed traps. I would find myself thinking about police for no good reason. I'd slow down, and up ahead there would be a speed trap. An officer with a radar gun or someone on the side, obviously looking for speeders. When I decided I didn't want to slow down, I would get boxed in. There's only one time in the 2 years I lived there that I didn't slow down and didn't get boxed in, and that time there was a speed trap on the opposite side of the freeway. I moved to California after my time in New Hampshire, and I moved to San Jose actually. I was driving out on Highway 101 from San Francisco to San Jose late one night. I was pretty down. The stretch of road I was on had a 50 mile per hour speed limit, but I was going between 65 and 70. The stretch of road went down, snaked to the right, and then went under an overpass. At the same time, it snaked back to the left, and then went up again. It was very dark in that area. As I approached, I noticed I was thinking about police. I knew that California didn't fund radar equipment at that time, so I thought it was weird to be thinking of police. All of a sudden, I was overcome with the idea that I could die that night. My immediate, intense, and visceral reaction was no. Within a minute, I saw a policeman come up on me from behind. I was in the inside of the 2 lanes. He pulled in front of me, and I was pretty sure I was caught fair and square. He was slowing down but made no effort to pull me over. When he got down to about 25 miles per hour, he put on his lights. However, he made no effort to pull me over. At about that point, we went around the spot where the road snaked to the right as it went down. It then wound to the left. At that point, the officer was down to 5 miles per hour. I looked in his headlights, and there, stopped squarely across the inside travel lane, the one I was in, was a dark-colored station wagon. It had no lights on whatsoever. I would have been moving too fast when it came into view to stop in time. He waved me around the car, and I continued on home unhurt. Next story. This happened many years ago. In my jurisdiction, there stood a home that was about 100 years old. At the time of my experience, the home was uninhabited. It was a brick 3-story Victorian-style house on a large corner lot. My partner and I got called to the residence one evening to investigate a possible burglary. A neighbor close by noticed an open door and called the police. This seemed strange to my partner and I because we had worked that district together for nearly 3 years and had never been aware of any problems at the house. My partner and I arrived there shortly after 2 a.m. We didn't observe any lights or movement inside the residence. We located the open door and announced ourselves before making entry. When no one responded to our announcement, we carefully went inside. We began a methodical room-to-room search on each floor. We searched the entire residence and weren't able to find any person or signs of forced entry on any windows or doors. I then radioed dispatch and asked them to contact a key holder. Once dispatch verified that a key holder was 30 minutes out, my partner and I waited in the residence for their arrival. After waiting for approximately 10 minutes, we started getting curious and began taking notice of furniture and pictures that appeared to be as old as the house. I was standing in the main hallway off of the living room. I was admiring the moonlight through a large picture window when I saw a shadow cross the hallway from the foot of the staircase and into the living room approximately 3 feet away. My first reaction was, crap, we missed someone. I drew my weapon and yelled for my partner who had wandered into the kitchen. Once she was closer, I again identified us as police officers and demanded that the person I saw come forward with her hands up. No one responded. My partner and I worked together for some time and we did not for a second doubt one another. She asked me for a physical and clothing description of the person I saw. I explained that I'd only seen a shadow. I didn't know it at the time, but we were about 2 feet apart and back to back. Then I heard her scream, "Police, show me your hands!" I didn't turn immediately because the subject may circle back to the living room and attack us from behind. When I asked her to describe what she saw, she said that she had just seen just a shadow. After demanding the subject to come out one more time, we decided that I would go into the living room from one end of the hallway while she covered the other. I slowly approached the corner of the living room entryway and breathed in deeply. I then made entry quickly into the living room. I saw absolutely no one there. There was no other way into the living room but the 2 entryways we had been covering. All the windows in the living room were closed and locked. I shouted to my partner and asked if she could see anyone from her position. She, of course, said she had not. We then called for backup to conduct a more thorough search of the residence. Backup arrived and a secondary search was conducted. Again, nothing was found. By then the key holder had arrived. She was an older agent with a real estate firm. I informed her that there did not appear to be any damage or property missing from the residence. She kind of got this "I knew there wouldn't be" look on her face. She must have noticed my expression because she stated, "Young man, that house has been haunted for 75 years. She went on to say that she had grown up in the area and the house was kind of an urban legend. Apparently, a previous owner of the residence had fallen off the roof of the house in the 1930s and died instantly. Since then, every owner of the house had reported strange activity. She said that in the 1960s the house had been abandoned for a few years, and the high school kids would often break into the house to drink beer and smoke some grass. One night a group of kids were in the house, and they all saw a strange man standing in the main hallway staring at them. After that night, they never went back to the house. I have no explanation for what my partner and I saw, but I can say that we were experienced officers. We're trained to trust our instincts, and we don't draw our weapons unless we feel that we're in danger." Which meant that we felt we were in danger. Next story. Unexplained things sometimes really do occur, more than most people would like to believe. I'm not one of those strangely gifted people, but I am open-minded to such matters, mainly based on my own personal experience. As an avid reader of world and local history, and having been in a position to witness many tragic and extraordinary events, mostly after the fact, You cannot help but see how some of these events have not left behind residual imprints of a time long since past. My first occasion to see what I could not explain took place in the north end of Wyandotte on a cold, rainy night around 3 a.m., or about 3:30. The temperature outdoors was cold and a bone-chilling dampness in late September, and an instance where you would not want to be out in the weather. I was parked in a patrol unit with my headlights out, listening to the radio, watching traffic drive past, staring directly east across the street facing the Detroit River. Most of the homes are large, stately structures built to demonstrate their owner's prominence and stature in another time. While looking at nothing in particular, I happened to see something that caught my attention. Thinking I was watching an intruder prowling around, I clearly saw a man of medium height walking slowly from the side of the house toward the middle of the vast driveway. Several feet to the south of the driveway was a carport-type shelter where at least 4 vehicles were sitting, dark, cold, and wet. I will never forget this. There before my eyes, and from across the street of no more than 60 to 80 feet in distance, a man appeared to be walking from the side of the old brick house across the driveway to a car. Although appeared to be walking slowly across the way, it was more like gliding. Nothing strange, you say. His dress and attire were odd, to say the least. First of all, because it was rainy and cold, and his appearance was that of a period clothing, perhaps dating from the 1920s or something, and he was not wearing an overcoat or a hat, yet he appeared dry and virtually unscathed by the cold rain. His overall general appearance was that of being luminescent, meaning I believe that I could almost see through him. I watched in curiosity. He appeared almost see-through, and his gait was not that of a man wanting to get out of the elements quickly. He walked into a parked car and dissolved without the car door opening or the interior light activating. I knew exactly what I was seeing, even though my inner self was telling me what I thought I was looking at. I continued my position without movement, as a means of satisfying my curiosity. I waited several minutes to see the dome interior light activate, condensation exhaust to rush out of the car started, or even see if the lights would turn on, but nothing occurred. It continued lightly raining, and the car appeared as cold and dark as it did before my sighting. Finally, after waiting for another sighting and nothing else occurred, I pulled away slowly, cranking my head left as I examined the house. I was correct. From the point where I had first seen the male figure on the south side of the house, there were no doors, and not one lamplight was on in the house at the time. Is it true? Yes. Is it possible? I think yes, more than we care to know about. Next story. I've always wanted to believe, but never had a real reason to. That is, until August in 1977. I was a rookie officer, 21 years old. I had been on a small city PD for 4 months. Now keep in mind, in those days, you were put on the street prior to attending the academy. I was off duty at home one evening when over the scanner I heard units in an ambulance dispatch to a certain street. I knew the address. It was that of a couple that I had known for a couple of years. They were an over-the-road truck driving team. They had 2 daughters, 17 and 12. I knew both of them as well. The parents would be gone for days and weeks at a time. The older daughter took care of the household when Mom and Dad were on the road. She was a mature young lady. I did know that she was smitten by an EMT who worked for the EMS. He was much older and a user. This night was to be their first date. When I heard dispatch, I went to the residence. They were bringing the older daughter out of the house on a gurney with a GSW to the chest. I took her younger sister with me and followed EMS to the hospital. Debbie was for all intents DOA. Docs tried but weren't able to save her. I spent the next 6 hours trying to find her parents. The West Virginia National Guard located them and broke the news. It was ruled a suicide. The parents didn't want an autopsy, but there were questions. One of the docs thought she may have been raped, but there was no evidence. Remember, things were much simpler then. Jump forward 2 weeks. I was at home in bed when a friend called and asked if she could come by. Sure, let yourself in. I was probably an hour or so later before she arrived, and I was sound asleep. When I woke up, it was freezing, and she was sitting in the bed staring into space when I asked her what was wrong. She said, "It's not right. I'm not supposed to be dead. It's just not right. I didn't want to die." This was not in her voice. She repeated this many times, all along staring straight ahead. The whole time I was freezing, and this was August. She finally lay down and went to sleep. This person had no knowledge whatsoever of the person who died, nor did she remember anything at all. She stated that while she was out with her friends, she had an uncontrollable urge to see me, almost like she was driven to call. She remembered the urge and was driving 30 miles all the way to my house, but nothing else. She was not drinking, and she was of sound mind. I've never been so shook. This was real, and it scared the crap out of me. I attempted to open an investigation on her date to no avail. He was a sleazeball and walked on this. We're friends, that girl and I, to this day, and still talk about that night. As I said, I'd always wanted to believe, and that night I did. Next story. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's a stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me the story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and a poop stain on the pants. I'll tell this story in the first person, which is how he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house in Central Texas heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I'd just come off a string of days at home, so I knew I wasn't tired. I was in one of those two-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I got closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's effing sick. As I got closer, still I could see that this guy's eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point, he stops, mid-motion, and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see that it's an effing huge brown and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh crap, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to the point in the road where he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay it on and get the hell out of there. As I was passing, it looked at me again, not at the truck, looking at the driver's side windshield, at me. He obviously had the intelligence to know that there was a driver in there, and he knew where I was sitting. As I started to pass him, I could see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete, which is an old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing was effing giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scared the you-know-what out of me. Next story. So, I was in the Virginia, Maryland area and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday we wrapped up and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of Virginia. Got dragged off to other places even further out. The usual weekend fun times. Now it's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully, late afternoon Monday. I was fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, and I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m. in the middle of you-know-where, between Roanoke and D.C., absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane, simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour. No taillights either. No road lamps. It's dark. It's mildly damp. It's foggy. I have the music up. I'm feeling good. All is fine. And then I just happen to look to the left, and there's a dog barking at me. A German Shepherd in a car passenger seat. Somewhat blue glow from the instrument inside the car, and it's got its face to the window and it's barking its head off at me. I got a really good look at it too, because at first my brain is not registering cop car. So here I am doing 90 miles plus in a 75 mile per hour zone. I promptly have the uh-oh moment when the dog, the instruments, the white crown Vic, the light bar, all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down, but safe to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right because, wait, there is no shoulder on the left side of the road. I look back to my left, where there's still no shoulder or room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the effing highway, flipped on all my light bars, and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No taillights, no headlights, no engine sound, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting. It was an off-road SUV with the trimmings. There was no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. Now, what was it? I don't know. A ghost cop and his dog? What else could it be? Next story. My dad had several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just him and his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. But the creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy night, and it was cold and very damp. He was putting on chains before heading down a steep grade, and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchback, he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer, it jumped down, and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound, it leapt down and then over to the other side of the embankment. At that time, he thought it was a Sasquatch. Now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountains. Next story. I live in Spokane. I was driving back from my aunt's in the dark one night and just hit a massive wall of fog. I turned the corner and a whole herd of deer come running down the road towards me. I slowed down a lot so I wouldn't hit them. Then after another few seconds, I see a woman standing in the street, facing away from me with dirty clothes. The area I was in is known to have meth heads and heroin addicts, so I cracked the window and called out to her and asked if she needed me to call anyone. As soon as I spoke, her head whipped around, and it looked like she was a burn victim. Huge, lidless eyes, no eyebrows, Voldemort nose, and a mouth that looked like it was melted or sewn up or something. Then she ran off into the woods, and I drove a lot faster than I should have, just to get home. Next story. I went to a boarding school that was in the woods in Idaho, in Bonners Ferry, which was like an hour or more from Coeur d'Alene. In one of the dorms, there was this 8-foot shadowy figure that would just stare at you sleeping from across the room. The ceilings weren't that high, and there was a hunch to it, like the giant and big fish. I was there for 2 years. I saw it about a year in, but new kids on their first night saw it. Everyone knew. And if you got transferred to that dorm, then you were warned. In a joking manner. I mean, we were just kids. It's been almost 20 years, and I still get goosebumps writing that out. Of course, stories going round that it was just a really tall staff member named Jeff that committed suicide, and he was just making sure you were asleep. So that was its name, Jeff. Now, there was a different dorm, and one time, this was when I was there my first month, I was asleep in the top bunk, taking a nap with my arm hanging off the side. I don't remember what I was dreaming about, but this I remember clear as day. Just a cat hissing, and then screaming, and someone bit my finger hard, hard enough to bruise under my nail. I was totally alone in the dorm, and I was sleeping on my stomach. My arm was dangling, so it wasn't me doing it in my sleep. The dorms were separated by one half wall, and I got up, checked it out thinking someone ran over there and was just screwing with me, and then there was a bang on the wall from by my bunk. Again, I was totally alone. I can't speak for this because it was in the girls' dorm, but they had a little girl that would run through the bathroom screaming and leave behind wet footprints. Their dorm was by ours, but there was a little pond, and when we were out there, some girls came running, screaming and saying it happened. A female staff went and checked it out, and I remember when she came out, she had that expression that's kind of like a half smile that said, "I don't know, and I can't explain it." And she was like, "Yeah, there's a child's footprint in there." Next story. Well, one time I was staying at a youth hostel in the Bavarian woods in Germany. It was a former Hitler youth training facility and boarding school and had a lot of secret history to it. In the main building, there was a large room on the second floor you had to walk through in order to get to the restrooms. Every night when I was walking through that room, I always felt some malevolent presence was in the very back corner watching me, and it was upsetting on a very primal gut instinct level for me. I would walk very quickly through the room. It didn't help that there were no light switches close enough to allow you to illuminate the room. I thought I was just being a scaredy cat, so I didn't mention it to my group until one night one of my group members returned from the bathroom and said, "I hate walking through that room to get to the bathroom. It freaks me out." Everyone got this look on their face, and it was then obvious every one of us was having an experience in that room. I told everyone not to say a word, grab a piece of paper from the nearby arts and crafts table, and write down what they felt or experienced in the room. When we shared what we had all written down, it was spooky as hell. Everyone said there was something in the back corner, and whatever it was dark and evil. I never did get the entire history of the camp because they only acknowledged what it was in the past and left it at that. There were bomb craters and bunkers all around it, so I'm sure it saw some action during the war.